Hello YouTube, this is Austin NY97 or Austin NY928. That's my that Austin NY28 my main channel. But this is my secondary channel and I'm doing a video on this one because my main channel I have a strike on it and I can't do Google Hangouts because of that strike because of a video I uploaded from NFL Network involving the worst collapses in the NFL history and the NFL put a copyright issue on it. So yes, yeah, thanks to the NFL, I can't do Google Plus videos on my main account. That's why I created another one. Anyway, anyway, it's, the point of the video is, the title says it all. The top five greatest defenses in NFL history that didn't win the Super Bowl. Now, since football season is about to begin in 2 days, as I'm making this video, I was thinking, everyone does, top 10 defenses of all time, and all of them, have won Super Bowls. And I was thinking, what are the greatest defenses in NFL history that didn't win? I thought it'd be an interesting video to make, doing some research and all that. If not, I, I, I came up with a list of five of the greatest defenses in NFL history that did not win the Super Bowl. I came up, yep, and and hopefully, people who watch this video will hopefully, go back and do the research and realize how great these defenses are. And we appreciate, how good they were. Anyway, let's get to anyway. The, Now this is my list. You may agree with it. You may not. You may disagree with me. You may think I'm full of shit. I don't know what I'm talking about. But like I said, it's my list. So here we go. Number five, 2006 Baltimore Ravens. Now everyone knows the 2000 Baltimore Ravens, the team that won the Super Bowl. They ended up killing my New York Giants in Super Bowl 35, which was a bad memory. But anyway, a lot of people don't forget about that '06 Raven team, which is very underrated, very great defense. I mean that team was really like looking back at it, was really damn impressive. If you look at some of the stats, which I'm about to pull up right now. Give me a minute, I'll pull it up right now. Like not too slow, but a little bit. Let's see, going to history. Where's the '06? Here we go, '06 Ravens. Here we go. I'm about to pull up their stats right now. Oh, that's embarrassing. It's kind of embarrassing for me to do something like that. Hang on, you can hear me, right? Okay. Now the Now 2006 Baltimore Ravens led or first in fewest points allowed, giving up a total of 201 points the entire regular season. An average per they gave up 12.6 points per game, which is pretty damn impressive. Like I said, which was first in the league. The Ravens also defense was also gave up the fewest yards with 4,225 yards the entire season, which was number one. The Ravens were second in turnovers in creating turnovers with 40 turnovers and first and anyway the Ravens defense in terms of passing yards was six. They gave the sixth fewest passing yards that year with 3,011, and also that and passing touchdowns. The Baltimore Ravens were fifth, gave up the fifth fewest passing touchdowns with 16. However, the Ravens led the league in interceptions with 28 interceptions, which is pretty impressive. Now, if you look at the rushing defense, the Baltimore Ravens gave the second fewest yards in, ter- in, in terms of rushing defense with 1,214 yards, and all the Ravens were first in fewest rushing touchdowns with five, and also rushing yards per attempt. The Ravens were second; they had the second fewest with 3.3 they gave up 3.3 yards per attempt, which is like I said, second fewest, which is impressive. And all and also the Ravens, I believe that year led the league in sacks. With that Baltimore Ravens defense had 60 sacks that year, which I believe, like I said, I think that was the most sacks in the NFL that year. Probably was. I could be wrong. And the guy and that was by Trevor Pryce, who led the team in sacks with 13. I mean, if you look at this team was pretty damn impressive. Considering, yeah, Ray Lewis in his prime, yeah, Bart Scott, pretty damn good linebacker, a young Terrell Suggs. I mean, those three at linebacker are pretty phenomenal. And then Adelius Thomas, I believe I say his first name, had a great year that year, and I believe was a all pro player and a Pro Bowler. Then you had and in the secondary you had Ed Reed, who's considered one of the greatest safeties in NFL history, who had 5 interceptions that year. And then you had at left corner you had Chris McAllister, who was a Pro Bowler that year, who actually had 6 interceptions, more than Ed Reed. And you also had young Haloti Ngata on that team too. So think about all those guys on that team. That's one hell of a defense right there, having guys like that. I mean, it's gonna be tough to score on that team, regardless of whether you're passing the ball or trying to run the ball. And I believe they led the league in sacks. So I mean, it was tough. It must have been tough to play those guys because he couldn't run on them, he couldn't pass against them, and your quarterback was under pressure, so you really had to be at your A game if you're going to beat the Ravens that year. The Ravens that year went 13-3, won the AFC North, and I believe had they had the number 2 seed because that was the year the Chargers won number 1 and won 14-2. But they lost in the first playoff game, to the not the Baltimore, the Indianapolis Colts, excuse me. Used to play in Baltimore, but not anymore. But in that playoff game, the Ravens did not give up a touchdown. All all the Colts points came off field goals, so the Colts won 15-6 as the Colts went on to win the Super Bowl that year. So I mean, at least they lost to the eventual champs. I mean, I guess that's a good thing. Oh, anyway, number 4 on my list, the 1971 Minnesota Vikings. Now, in this era, Minnesota had a great defense from like 1968 to like 1978. That's when Minnesota had like a dominant streak of. I believe that during that time period, they only missed the playoffs once. I could be wrong, but they went to 4 Super Bowls. Unfortunately for the Vikings, they never won any Super Bowls. They always lost. I mean, well, they lost all 4. That's, which I just made a redundancy. Anyway, because I said, which you all know that they lost. I just said it. Anyway, sorry for my stuttering. It's kind of late, and it's a little late, and I don't know. Part of me is a little nervous making the video on Google Hangout. But anyway, let's get back in focus. The 1971 Minnesota Vikings led the league in fewest points per game with 9.9 points per game. France throughout the entire season, the Minnesota Vikings allowed 139 points per game, which is, and this is during a 14-game season too. Now, if you look at some of the team ranks, like I said, they were first in fewest points per game allowed. They were second best defense in terms of giving up yards. That defense was, like I said, the second best with giving up only 3,406 yards. Turnovers, the Minnesota Vikings were third. Had a third most turnover. I mean, created third most turnovers. That defense with 45. The Minnesota Vikings that year gave up the third fewest passing yards with 1,806, and also gave up the third fewest touchdowns that year, 10 passing touchdowns, I should say, and also had the third most interceptions that year with 27 interceptions. And now in terms of rushing, Minnesota Vikings gave up the sixth fewest rushing yards with 1,600 rushing yards they gave up, which was, like I said, the sixth fewest. And the Minnesota Vikings led the league with fewest rushing touchdowns, with with two rushing touchdowns, which like I said was number one in the league that year. And in terms of rushing yards per attempt, the Minnesota Vikings were eighth. Gave the eighth fewest rushing yards per attempt with 3.6. And also I forgot. Also in terms of net yards gained per pass attempt, the Minnesota Vikings that year led the league with fewest net yards gained per passing attempt with 4.2. And unfortunately, sacks back then wasn't kept as a stat back then. It wasn't until like 1982 when they officially kept sacks and as a stat for teams and stuff like that. But this Minnesota Viking team was a very damn good team defensively. That year, Carl Eller was an All-Pro player, and he was the first defensive player in NFL history to win NFL MVP that year, and he was also Defensive Player of the Year. Alan Page, I believe it was Alan Page or Carl Eller. Let me check to make sure, cause I think I might have said Carl Eller, but I'm not sure. I could be wrong about Carl Eller. I'm not sure if I said Carl Eller or Alan Page. I know I said one or two. I'm not sure who it was. I forget it's one or two who won the NFL MVP that year. I'm checking right now, and it was it was Alan Page who was 1971 NFL MVP that year, which is like you said the first one be the first defensive player to be defensive to win NFL MVP. Impressive. He's one of two guys to only do that. The other guy being Lawrence Taylor, of course. You also had Jim Marshall, who was very underrated as a defensive end, very good. Based on what I've heard and based on the stuff I've seen, very, very great, very great defensive end. Probably you can make a case should be in the Hall of Fame. You also had Carl Eller, another Hall of Famer, who Eller, Page, and Marshall made up three-fourths of the Purple People Eaters, which was a dominant defense for the Minnesota Vikings throughout the late 60s and throughout the 70s, which led them to those four Super Bowls. And also they had another Hall of Famer in their secondary by the name of Paul Krause, who I believe has the most interceptions out of any player in NFL history of 81. I could be wrong on that. I mean, I could be wrong, but I checked it recently. I believe it was Paul Krause who was the league lead, who has the most interceptions out of any player in NFL history. They also have Bobby Bryant who was, I believe, also their secondary player, who was very underrated as a defensive back, who was, very at the time was very good, but very underrated. Who had some good years with Minnesota. So I mean, having but one of the problems with the Minnesota Vikings was they never really had a great linebacker, which really came back to bite them in the ass in the Super Bowls. Because you look at the four Super Bowls they lost during that time period, they got killed in the running game. Whether it be Kansas City, Miami, Pittsburgh, or Oakland, they just got killed in the running game. That was really what really hurt the Vikings, was not being able to stop the run in the Super Bowl. And the Minnesota Vikings that year finished first in the NFC Central Division. For younger football fans, back then there was no NFC North or NFC South. There was only NFC East, NFC West, and NFC Central. Basically, most of the teams that are in NFC North today were in the Central, including some NFC South teams, I believe. Anyway, they finished first in the Central Division, had 11-3 record. If you remember it, this was a 14 game season at the time. It wasn't until 1978 they extended it to a 16 game season, and ended up losing to the Dallas Cowboys in the first round of the playoffs. But the Cowboys that year went on to win their first Super Bowl. So I mean, they lost to So I mean, at least they lost to the eventual Super Bowl champs. Anyway, my number three greatest defense that won championship of all time. Now this one's tough because 3 and 2 for me are tough because for me personally, I think any one of these two could be three or number three or number two. These two teams, and I'm still kind of deciding who should I put number three, who should I put number two. So give me mid. I know it's stupid. I should have had this. I should have decided this way before I made the video. I know it's stupid, but let me think about it for a second. Hang on, I need to check. I need to check the stats for one team. That's on. For the. I need to check the stats for one of the teams. Try and see. Look at these stats and see which team should be. Which defense should be higher than the other. Okay, I already made my decision. My no, I, all right. My number three greatest defense of all time that didn't win the Super Bowl, the 1975 Los Angeles Rams. Well, for a lot of younger football fans who don't know, LA used to have a football team. The Rams used to actually be based in LA, and it was in 1995 they moved to St. Louis. But anyway, the 75 Rams. This was during a period where the Rams were very good. Like they were always like title contenders during that time period in the 70s. I believe they won like 5 or 6 straight division titles in the 70s from like 73 to 79, and I made it to like 4 NFC championship games. I mean, they went to that one Super Bowl in '79, then when they lost to Pittsburgh, and this defense in '75 is probably the best out of all of them in terms of stats. There we go. That defense that year was first in fewest points allowed, and they allowed 135 points the entire season, an average of 9.6 points per game, which, like I said, led the league in fewest points allowed, and also were second in fewest yards allowed, with 3,322 yards for an entire season, which is the second fewest in the NFL that year. In terms of turnovers, the LA Rams were actually 11th and had 11th most turnovers. The defense created 11th most turnovers in the NFL that year with 40. In terms of passing, here we go. The LA Rams were third and giving up. They gave up the third fewest passing yards that year, 1,789, and they were also third in giving up the third fewest touchdowns, passing touchdowns with 11, which that's pretty good. But the LA Rams had a tenth most interceptions with 22. The defense. And in terms of net yards gained per pass attempt, the LA Rams were fourth in terms of allowing 4.2 yards per pass game. I mean, the LA Rams allow 4.2 yards per passing yards per pass during that season, which was fourth in the NFL. Now let's go to rushing. The LA Rams gave up the second fewest yards per game. Second fewest yards in the entire season, with 1,533 rushing yards for the entire season. Like I said, which was the second fewest. The LA Rams also had the excuse me. The LA Rams had defense gave up the fewest rushing touchdowns, which is 4. They gave up 4 rushing touchdowns that entire year, which is pretty impressive considering back then more teams ran the ball than passed the ball. Sorry, I charged my laptop and sure it doesn't go dead or else it won't be in the video for you guys to see. Here we go. Like I said, my bad. Had gotta make sure the laptops doesn't die or else there's no video for you guys to enjoy. Anyway, where was that? Oh yeah, rushing. Yeah, like I think, like I said, the Rams were able to fewest rushing touchdowns that year, 4. Anyway, in terms of rushing yards gained per attempt, the LA Rams allowed 3.6 rushing yards gained, and which was 4th in NFL that year. And if you look at the LA Rams, their defense was pretty damn solid. They had Jack Youngblood, a very Hall of Famer, very great pass rusher. Everyone knows his legendary 1979 playoff run where he played with a broken leg in the playoffs when the Rams went to the Super Bowl that year, and even put in the Pro Bowl that year with a broken leg. I mean, very gutsy of Jack Youngblood. But like I said, great pass rusher, very underrated. But at least he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, so I mean that's good. Merrill Olsen, everyone knows Merrill Olsen from the being part of the fearsome foursome that dominate, that the front four that dominated their opponents during the 60s and the early 70s. Hall of Famer himself, one of the greatest pass rushers in NFL history, and also hang on, I'm trying to see if I can find and Fred Dryer. There we go, Fred Dryer, who was a very good pass rusher, not very good. Had a good year that year. I believe says all 3 made a Pro Bowl that year. And I mean that's a pretty good front four. That's a pretty. I mean they could have been like a second incarnation of the fearsome foursome. And I'm not sure who started there, who was the other member of the front four, honestly, because I know those 3 were part of, were among the front four. I don't know who the other guy is. I know that's kind of stupid of me not to know that. I should have been better and prepared. I know. Yeah, we're gonna do that. Anyway, Isaiah Robertson was also on the defense, and Isaiah Robertson was a very good linebacker back in his day, who was great at stopping the run and keep playing his gap back then. And I believe everyone remembers him from that famous clip of Earl Campbell running over that linebacker as as I believe he scored a touchdown, and that happened to be Isaiah Robertson. But despite that, he was a very good player, very good linebacker, very good during the entire 70s. Helped the Rams, helped the Rams get to the playoffs like almost every year, along with Jack Youngblood and Fred Dryer and Merrill Olsen, defense. And also, I believe there's one more guy I'm forgetting that was on that defense who I think was pretty damn good too. Let me see. Um, I probably think shoot, give me. I'm trying to see here real quick who else I can put. I'm trying to think. There's one more guy I know. Unfortunately, I accidentally logged off of the stats of the of the page with the 1975 LA Rams. Excuse me. Unfortunately, I logged off of it by accident. Okay, there you go. There we go. Dave Elmerdorf, which I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. That's who at the who had a phenomenal year that year. Who was second team All Pro. He was second team All Pro. He was a safety. for the Rams back then. And if I can, and I'm trying to see how many, and he had four, even though he only had 4 interceptions that year, still, he still was a second team All Pro, which is pretty impressive. And also Jack Reynolds, who was Pro Bowler that year, and I believe All Pro himself. I could be wrong. Let me check if he was an All Pro. I'm not sure. It don't say. It don't say. Hang on. I don't know why I'm using Wikipedia. I should just use Pro Football Reference. My bad, guys. I know this is, I don't mean to fuck up. This is my first video using Google Plus. I'm sorry for fucking up for you guys. I should be a little more professional on that. That's my fault. It doesn't say where he was an All Pro. Oh yeah, it does. He wasn't All Pro that year. He was All Pro another year in '79. But he did make the Pro Bowl that year. Against 3 Hall of Famers. Safety who had a phenomenal year, and Dave Elmendorf and Jack Reynolds, who very good linebacker, very good. I mean, that's one main reasons why that Rams defense was very phenomenal during that period, especially in 1975. And the Rams that year were finished first in the NFC West, going 12-2, but I believe lost in the NFC Championship game to the Cowboys. And let me check right now. Yes, they lost to the Cowboys in the NFC Championship game, which is this is the first team that didn't this is the first defense, and I believe the only defense on this list that didn't lose to the eventual Super Bowl champs. Even though the Cowboys, went to the Super Bowl, obviously, because they beat the Rams in the NFC Championship game. The Cowboys that year are going to lose to the Steelers, which most football fans know. If you're into if you know your football history. But anyway, my number 2 greatest defense of all time that didn't win the Super Bowl is 1969 Minnesota Vikings. This team that in 1969, this Viking team allowed 133 points the entire season, which comes down to 9.5 per points per game, which is first in the NFL that year. Also, the Vikings that year gave up the fewest yards overall, with 2,720 yards per entire season. The Minnesota Vikings finished second in the NFL in terms of carrying turnovers with with 42, and the Minnesota Vikings that year gave the fewest. Well, I didn't say that, but they gave up the fewest passing yards overall that year, with 1,631 passing yards overall that year. Was like I said, which was first in the NFL that year. Also, the fewest passing touchdowns, with just 8. Damn impressive. And also had the most interceptions that year, with getting 30 interceptions that year, and also having a net also gave and also allowed 3.6 yards per pass, which was first in the NFL that year. Now let's go to the rushing the stats against the run. The Minnesota Vikings that year had the second fewest rushing yard. Gave up the second fewest rushing yards overall that year, with 1,089, which was second in the NFL. Also gave up the second fewest rushing touchdowns that year with four rushing touchdowns, which is impressive. That's phenomenal. That's I mean I can't. I mean, that's terrific. And I want to know who the hell was number one that year in terms of rushing touchdowns, considering that Viking defense was very phenomenal. And also in terms of rushing yards allowed, Minnesota Vikings allowed 3.2 rushing yards per attempt, which was first in the NFL that year. And they basically had the same group of great players that was on the 71 team. Jim Marshall, Carl Eller, Alan Page, Bobby Bryant, Paul Krause. Who all have phenomenal years that year and will go on to have phenomenal careers. But this team was better in terms of giving up fewer points per game. I think they were more dominant. They were more dominant rushing defense versus the 71 team. If you look at the numbers, which I'm gonna compare right now and see. Yep, the Minnesota Vikings were the 69 version of the Minnesota Vikings was much better run defense than the 71 version. In 69, they gave the second fewest yards in total season, while in 71 they gave the sixth fewest rushing yards. And also the Minnesota Vikings in 70, actually, I take that back. In 71, the Minnesota Vikings led the league in fewest rushing touchdowns, which is two. On 69, they allowed four, which is second in the league. But in terms of rushing, rushing yards allowed per attempt, the Minnesota Vikings allowed 3.6 yards, which was eighth in the NFL in 1971. While Minnesota Vikings allowed 3.2 rushing yards per attempt, which was first. And like I said, the Minnesota Vikings 69 gave up fewer points than they did in 71, which they're both great defenses regardless. And it's only by point 0.4 fewer points that the 69 team gave up. But still, but I still have to go with the 70. I still gotta go with the 69 team. Considering it was much better and they were more dominant than the 71. Well, both defenses were dominant, but in 69, which was a little bit more dominant, not by a lot, but just a little bit. Anyway, let me turn on the camera again. Anyway, the the 69 Vikings that year went 12-2, first in NFL Central Division, won the old NFL championship, which is the equivalent to the NFC Championship game in today's NFL, but lost in the Super Bowl to the Kansas City Chiefs, who had a great defense themselves and were a phenomenal team themselves against Kansas City. So I mean, they just lost to a better team, and they couldn't stop the run game. I believe in that Super Bowl. Yeah, in that Super Bowl they couldn't stop the run. That was one of the reasons why that Minnesota team during that period from like the late 60s to 70s never won a Super Bowl because in the Super Bowl itself they could never stop the run, like I said earlier. Anyway, four down, one left to go. Now, who could possibly have been the greatest defense in NFL history that didn't win the Super Bowl? Well, when this team, this is during a period where this team was winning Super Bowls and was very dominant. This is this is very um you it start this defense from Pittsburgh, known as the Steel Curtain defense. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the 1976 Pittsburgh Steelers as the greatest defense in NFL history that didn't win the Super Bowl. The Steelers that year were coming off winning back-to-back Super Bowls, and I'm pretty sure a lot of pressure on them considering everyone wanted to beat them. And what makes this defense so incredible was the fact that the team started out 1-4, and the defense helped the team win 9 straight to get to the playoffs, and then they made it all the way to the AFC title game. And the thing that really sets this defense apart from all the other defenses is that the Steelers had an NFL record, I believe. It's still a record this day of 5 shutouts an entire season. That's right. That defense shut out 5 of their opponents. Basically, 5 of their opponents didn't score a point. And then there was a couple, and this is when they won 9 straight to get to the playoffs. And then a couple occasions, the defense only allowed 3 points, and that was the case when they beat the Miami Dolphins in Week 10 of that year, and when they beat the Cincinnati Bengals of Week 12 of that year. So I mean that's just ridiculous to think you can keep your opponent from scoring. I mean you can go 5 games while allowing your opponent to score. I mean that's just incredible. That shows how great a defense they were. A still current defense, which is the greatest defense in NFL history. This being probably the best incarnation of them. That year, the Steelers gave up the fewest points per game with 138 points, which was equivalent to 9.9 points per game. So basically, if you round it up, they basically gave up 10 points per game. And they also had the fewest. They allowed the fewest yards per. They allowed the fewest yards overall that season, with 3,323 yards. And also, the Steelers defense was fifth in the league in terms of creating turnovers, despite the fact of their defense created 46 turnovers, which is impressive. And considering it's hard for a lot of teams to a lot of defenses to create create like at least 40 turnovers, let alone 46. And the Steelers defense that year gave up the sixth fewest passing yards with 1,866 passing yards. And also, the Steelers defense was third that year in passing touchdowns. Even though they were third, even though they only gave up 9 passing touchdowns that entire year, it was still third in the league. That just show you how great defenses were back then. And and also, the Steelers defense that year was ninth in interceptions. Steelers defense had 22 interceptions that year, and also, I'm sorry, I get distracted. Anyways, Steelers defense also um, uh, had net yards. Steelers defense allowed 4.5 passing yards per pass attempt, which is 6th in the NFL that year. And let's look at their defense against the run. The Steelers gave up the fewest rushing yards that year with 1,457 rushing yards, which, like I said, which was the fewest in the NFL that year. And also, they gave up the fewest rushing touchdowns that year with 5 rushing touchdowns they allowed. And also, the Steelers were number one in terms of allowing the fewest rushing rushing yards per attempt with 3.2. Because they allowed 3.2 rushing yards per attempt, which was the fewest in the NFL that year. And the thing was that back then teams ran the ball more than they passed the ball, because it was much tougher to pass the ball during that period. Because that's when you can just pick up quarterbacks and slam them in their heads and right receivers. I mean it sucked being a receiver. considering they can just beat the shit out of you defenders back then, and the referees couldn't throw a flag because it was legal. And that's one reason. That's what led to the 78 rule changes to open up the game more. Now the game's way too wide open. I think I personally think they need to make the game much more tougher for offenses to score. I think the offenses have it way too easy. That's just me personally. The Steelers that year finished 10-4, first in AFC Central, and they beat the Baltimore Colts in the playoffs that year, but lost in the AFC title game to the Oakland Raiders, who they had played in the last four previous postseasons before. And some of the Raiders and Steelers are rivals, where they probably have one of the greatest rivalries in NFL history, because all the games mattered, and there was always in like the AFC title game or the right to go, the right to go to the AFC title game, and whoever won those games usually won the Super Bowl. And the Raiders that year ended up winning the Super Bowl. Now, if you look at the defense, who were some of the players on defense? You had Hall of Famers left and right, like Jack Ham, Jack Lambert, two of the greatest linebackers in NFL history, probably the greatest linebacker tandem ever. And they probably had the greatest linebacking core in NFL history. Maybe. Well, actually, yeah, actually, they probably did, because they had a very underrated linebacker, Andy Russell, who was a very damn good linebacker for the Steelers in the 60s and early 70s, who probably could make a case, might have had a Hall of Fame career if you think about it. And that's just a linebacking core. Look up front, you L.C. Greenwood, who ha- who had a phenomenal year that year, I believe. Excuse me, I believe he was a Pro Bowler that year and was an all and I don't think he was all pro, but I know he was a Pro Bowler that year. You had me, you had Ernie Holmes on the front four also with him. You also had Mean Joe Green, who one of the greatest offensive tackles in NFL history. You know, he I mean, what more do I need to say about him that hasn't been said? Just one of the greatest ever in history of football. And the White Whites was also very good good front defensive player. Those four guys. I mean, that's a tough front four to go against, because they kick your ass. They can stop the run and they can pressure the quarterback. And I consider they have Lambert, Ham, and Andy Russell. Andy Russell at that point that was his final year, because he ended up retiring that year. But if you look at the secondary, you have Mel Blount, probably one of, if not the greatest corner in NFL history. I mean, that guy wasn't afraid to tackle, and he can pass, and he can deflect passes, and he can intercept balls. Intercept the ball. But he's not. But he was willing to tackle you and slam you on the ground and be physical with you and just maul you if you're a receiver. I mean, I would hate to play against Mel Blount if I was a receiver. That would suck so much. And then you also had Glenn Edwards that year, who was a Pro Bowler, who intercepted 6 passes, and Mel Blount also intercepted 6 passes too. And Mike Wagner, who was a very good secondary safety, who was with the Steelers for, I think, for all four of the Super Bowl championships in the 70s, who that year was a Pro Bowler. So I mean, who had a very phenomenal year that year. And I know there was one, and I'm trying to think any more guys I'm probably forgetting off that defense, that year, that era. No, so yeah, I mean, it's kind of surprising to think the Steelers, this is during, Steelers in 1976 didn't win the Super Bowl, considering this is during the 70s they won 4 Super Bowls in 6 years, which is just impressive. And the fact that the Steelers, if considering the fact the best incarnation, I believe that's the correct word, incorporation of the defense of the Steel Curtain didn't win the Super Bowl that year. It's kind of surprising, you would think. But yeah, again, they did lose to the Oakland Raiders team and ended up winning the Super Bowl. Even though some say, well, that in the AFC title game, Rocky Bleier and Franco Harris are hurt, but Rocky Bleier and Franco Harris are healthy, that the Raiders still would be in the Steelers year. It's just their year, and they would found a way to beat them. But anyway, like I said, the 1976 Pittsburgh Steelers, the greatest defense in NFL history that did not win the Super Bowl. I mean, just all these great players. You know, this is when they dominated the NFL with Steel Curtain and all that, and yet they didn't. And yet the best best incarnation of their defense didn't win. Kind of impressive. Anyway, so that's my list. So anyway, let me go over my list. Number 5, 2006 Baltimore Ravens. Number 4, the 1971 Minnesota Vikings. Number 3, the 1975 LA Rams. Number 2, the 1969 Minnesota Vikings. Number 1, 1976 Pittsburgh Steelers. These are the 5 greatest defenses in NFL history that didn't win Super Bowl. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you learned something new. And I'm sorry for stuttering at times, for getting information or for taking forever to get my thought. I am a little nervous. This is my first video doing on Google Plus, and hope, you know, I'm planning to do more of these on Google Plus, and hopefully, I'll get better as time goes on. This is like a little practice. I did use Google Plus before, but I never put it on YouTube. This is the first one ever, so I mean, hopefully hopefully I didn't do as bad as I thought I did. So anyway, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you think there's other defenses that didn't win Super Bowl that particular year that I should have added, write a comment down low. Below. Tell me which team, which year, and why. Let me know. I'm interested to hear your opinions about this. If you thought the list was good, let me know. If you thought, like I said, if you thought I missed some teams, like I said, put a comment down below. You know, and comment if I did good or not, because like I said, this is the first time I've done a video on Google Plus. I've actually gone on YouTube, so I was kind of nervous. That's why I kind of stuttered and lost my train of thought. And plus, it doesn't help that in fact I'm watching MLB Network right now, watching highlights. I mean, that doesn't help. Anyway, I should have done more research before I did the video, because I already knew the teams. I didn't know like I said, I didn't know where to put the 75 Rams number 2, or number 3, along with 69 Vikings, and I probably should have done more research on the teams, how good they were and stuff. You know what? I'll probably put a link to all the stats of these 5 teams, so that way you can go check out how good these defenses were and stuff. And hopefully for younger football fans, y'all learned something. Or if you're an older football fan that happens to watch this video, you probably remember. It probably gets you thinking again, like, oh yeah, that was a great defense, or that's right, I forgot that was a good defense that year. Or if you don't know about how good these defenses were, you learned something too. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. I'm sorry, like I said, I'm sorry I stuttered, or sorry I lost my train of thought. I am a little nervous, like I said. First video on Google Plus that's going on YouTube. So anyway, hopefully y'all have a great day, great night. You know, I'm happy football's back, and hopefully it'll be a good year. Even though I'm not looking forward to the referees, being forced to to enforce. I mean, to stricken their officiating on on defenders, basically make it harder for defenders to play defense. But that's a whole different video I can make, whole different issue. But anyway, have a good day, good night, wherever time you're watching this, and stay safe. And there's more videos on the way. Goodbye.